Mr. Speaker, at this time I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend remarks on H. Conrad 63.
Is there objection? Hearing no objection, so ordered.
I yield the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker, to my friend, my colleague, the gentleman from California, the chairman on the Committee of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lantos, and I ask unanimous consent that he be allowed to control the time.
Is there, without objection, the gentleman from California, Chairman Lantos, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my friend from Missouri for yielding. I'm very pleased to yield 5 minutes to a distinguished member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, chairman of our Europe subcommittee, my friend and colleague from Florida, Mr. Wexler.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Lantos. Today I stand with the American people in support of this resolution and in opposition to the President's escalation of the Iraq War. I stand in opposition to a President that failed the American people by initiating an ill-conceived war, an administration that misled the nation, vulnerable after 9/11, into believing that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, an administration that invented links between Baghdad and al-Qaeda, that ignored the views of the intelligence community while convincing Americans that our brave soldiers would be greeted in Iraq as liberators, an administration that assured us that Iraqi oil money would pay for the reconstruction, and that through military force rather than diplomacy, we would cultivate American values of freedom and democracy in Iraq. The American people know that they have been taken down a false path by this administration, down a spiraling path of war under false pretenses, into a quagmire with a president who will not change course, even in the face of a growing civil war. This resolution sends the president an unequivocal message that he must change direction of this war. How did we arrive in this desperate situation? From the top down, the President, the Vice President, and the Secretary of State have manipulated evidence, broadcast half-truths, and doctored intelligence through an orchestrated effort to smear and destroy those who have opposed their policies. Just last week, in a scathing report, the Defense Department's Inspector General concluded that the Pentagon took inappropriate action by advancing conclusions that were not backed up by the intelligence community. The American people have judged the actions of this president. They see this war for what it is, and they spoke clearly in November, stating loudly that we must end our disastrous Iraq policy. Yet this administration continues its defiant disregard of the views of the American people. Not the voice of the American people nor the conclusions of the Iraq Study Group have budged this administration from its stubborn and misguided path. And now the President is doubling down on a bad bet that risks the lives of thousands more American soldiers on a misguided plan that ignores the recommendations of our military commanders on the ground. Unbelievably, President Bush has already tried twice the strategy of escalation. It failed both times. To try again is to act in blind faith, ignoring the facts, ignoring the experts, ignoring the will of the American people, and worst of all, ignoring the terrible sacrifices that will undoubtedly be endured by our soldiers and their families. Mr. Speaker, our troops must be redeployed from Iraq. Instead of a surge of American troops entering Baghdad, there should be a surge of American soldiers back into every town and every city across our nation. For our troops who have given so much in Iraq, for our military families whose lives have been shattered by this war, it is time to bring them home. How do we honor our brave men and women? How do we honor over the 3,000 who died and thousands more who have been maimed? Instead of an escalation, we should honor these soldiers by bringing them home and giving them the best health care, the best mental health support that they have justly earned. I applaud Congress for taking a stand on this war. I only wish we were voting on a binding resolution that mandates a redeployment of troops and cuts off funding for this tragic escalation. Each month we remain in Iraq, 100 more American soldiers die, hundreds more are maimed, and $5.5 billion is spent. Mr. Speaker, we have endured 4 years of a failed Iraq policy, longer than we were in World War II, longer than we were in the Korean War, and we can afford no more blank checks for this president. Today I stand with the American people, our soldiers in Iraq, with my fellow members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, in strong opposition to the president's escalation in Iraq and in support of our redeploying our troops and reversing, most importantly, our nation's failed strategy in Iraq. I yield back the remainder of my time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time